raised by a cruel stepmother to believe she was nothing until the most desired England duke said. Marianne Fletcher's fingers trembled as she adjusted her half-sister's silk sash, making herself smaller against the ballroom wall. Around her, London's finest twirled in glittering gowns, while she wore an altered dress 2 seasons out of fashion. Lady Corinne's grip suddenly tightened on her arm, nails digging through thin fabric, her whisper sharp as broken glass. "Remember your place. You are nothing, Marianne. A burden we dress out of pity. Do not draw attention to yourself." But across the crowded room, one pair of eyes had already found her. The Duke of Wyndale, England's most desired bachelor, was watching. And what he was about to say would shatter everything Marianne had been taught to believe about herself. "Hello, lovelies. Enjoying Marianne and Adrian's transformative journey? A like or subscribe would mean the world. It helps me bring you more stories of courage, worth, and finding your voice from history's most oppressive corners. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it truly brightens my day to hear from you. London, May 1842. The Ashford Ballroom smelled of roses and ambition. 1. Marianne had perfected the art of disappearing. She stood against the cream-coloured wall, hands folded, shoulders curved inward, making herself as small as possible, while her stepmother and half-sister sparkled at the room's centre. Lady Corinne wore emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. Bianca, 17 and lovely, laughed too loudly at Lord Pemberton's jokes, desperate to catch the attention of any titled gentleman. Marianne was 22, but she felt ancient. Years of being told she was nothing had a way of aging a person from the inside out. Marianne, Lady Corinne's voice was sugar over poison. "Come fix Bianca's sash, it's twisted again." Marianne moved immediately, years of training making her feet quick and her head bowed. She reached her half-sister and began adjusting the pale pink ribbon, her fingers efficient despite their trembling. "Must you hover?" Bianca said, not unkindly but thoughtlessly. "You look like a servant." "Because that's what she is," Lady Corinne said, low enough that only Marianne heard. Her stepmother's grip closed on Marianne's arm, nails biting through the thin fabric of her gown. The dress was Bianca's from 2 seasons ago, altered poorly to fit Marianne's smaller frame. The colour, a muddy yellow, made her look sallow. "Remember your place," Corinne hissed, her breath hot against Marianne's ear. "You are nothing, Marianne. A burden we dress out of pity. Do not draw attention to yourself." The words landed like they always did, settling into the space between Marianne's ribs where all the other cruel words lived. She nodded, finishing with the sash, and retreated to her wall, to her shadows, to her proper place. Across the ballroom, Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Wyndale, was suffocating under the weight of being England's most desired bachelor. 3 mothers had cornered him in the past 10 minutes, each pushing a daughter forward like livestock at market. He smiled politely, deflected gracefully, and wished desperately to be anywhere else. At 32, Adrian had wealth, land, and a title that made grown men bow. What he did not have was peace. Every social event became a battlefield where ambitious families competed for his attention. No one saw him. They saw the Duke of Wyndale, a prize to be won, a solution to their financial problems or social ambitions. He was so tired of performing. His eyes drifted across the crowd, looking for an escape route when he noticed her. A young woman in an unfortunate yellow dress, pressed against the wall, as if trying to melt into the wallpaper. She was not dancing. She was not laughing or flirting. She was simply watching with sharp, intelligent eyes that saw everything. Then he saw something else. A woman in emerald silk, he recognized her as Lady Corinne Fletcher, gripped the girl's arm hard enough to leave marks. The girl flinched, but did not pull away. Lady Corinne spoke, and even from this distance, Adrian could see the words land like blows. The girl in yellow nodded, her shoulders curving further inward, and Adrian felt something hot and uncomfortable twist in his chest. He knew that posture. He had seen it in abused horses, in beaten dogs, in people who had learned that making themselves small was the only way to survive. "Your Grace, might I introduce my daughter, Miss Caroline?" Another mother appeared at his elbow, blocking his view. "Of course," Adrian said automatically. But his attention was still on the girl against the wall. An hour later, the moment came that would change everything. Adrian had finally extracted himself from the mothers and was heading toward the refreshment table when he heard Lady Corinne's voice, sharp and performative. "Marianne, do stop skulking about. Make yourself useful and help the servants with the wine." Adrian turned. The girl in yellow Marianne was being handed a tray by Lady Corinne, her face burning with humiliation as nearby guests noticed and whispered. "Really, Lady Corinne?" an older woman said, eyebrows raised. "Surely your stepdaughter should not be—" "Oh, pay her no mind," Lady Corinne said loudly, smiling at Adrian as he approached. Her timing was deliberate. "She's just the spare girl we took in after her mother died. Quite insignificant, really. She's fortunate we allow her to attend at all." The surrounding guests went quiet. Marianne's face drained of colour. She held the tray with white-knuckled hands and tried to smile, tried to shrink even smaller, tried to become nothing, just as she had been taught. Adrian looked at Lady Corinne. He looked at Marianne, and he made a choice. "On the contrary, Lady Corinne," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the sudden silence. "I find Miss Fletcher the most interesting person in this room." The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Adrian stepped closer to Marianne, meeting her shocked hazel eyes directly. "Whoever told you you're nothing was lying. You are the only one here who seems real." Marianne stared at him. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The tray trembled in her hands. Lady Corinne's smile froze into something brittle and dangerous. "Your Grace, you are too kind, but surely—" "Miss Fletcher," Adrian said, ignoring Corinne completely, "would you do me the honour of this dance?" The whispers exploded. A duke asking the wallflower to dance. The stepchild, the nothing girl. I don't." Marianne's voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't have to," Adrian said gently, "but I would very much like to, if you're willing." Marianne looked at Lady Corinne, seeking permission from years of habit. Her stepmother's face was a mask of fury behind a strained smile. She could not refuse a duke publicly without causing a scene. "Of course," Corinne said through clenched teeth. "How generous of your Grace." A footman took the tray from Marianne's shaking hands. Adrian offered his arm. After a moment of frozen terror, Marianne placed her fingers lightly on his sleeve, and he led her onto the dance floor. The waltz began. Marianne was stiff as a board, certain this was some elaborate joke at her expense. Adrian could feel her trembling. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I promise I'm not as frightening as I look." "You're not frightening at all," Marianne said automatically, then flushed. "I mean, you're a duke, so obviously I didn't mean—" "I meant what I said," Adrian interrupted gently, guiding her through the steps with patience. "You're the only person here who isn't performing. Everyone else is wearing masks, but you're just on yourself." "Myself is not very impressive," Marianne said, the words falling out before she could stop them. "I disagree." Adrian smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. Tell me, how are you finding this spectacle? It must be exhausting to be on display." Marianne looked up at him, startled by the question. No one ever asked her opinion about anything. "I wouldn't know, Your Grace. I've only ever been allowed to stand in the shadows and hold the spare gloves." The words came out dry and unexpectedly funny. Adrian laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby couples turn to stare. "That's exactly what I meant," he said. "Everyone else is telling me what they think I want to hear. You just told me the truth." The dance ended too quickly. Adrian returned Marianne to the edge of the ballroom, not to Lady Corinne, but to a spot near the terrace doors where she might catch some air. "Thank you, Miss Fletcher," he said, bowing. "That was the only honest conversation I've had all evening." He left her there, returning to his duties as the most desired Duke in England. But as he endured more introductions and empty flirtations, his eyes kept drifting back to the girl in the unfortunate yellow dress, standing alone against the wall, one hand pressed against her chest, as if trying to hold something precious inside. Marianne stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Around her, whispers swirled like smoke. "Did you see? The Duke danced with the Fletcher stepdaughter. I heard she's practically a servant in that house." How mortifying for Lady Corinne. Marianne barely heard them. Only one thing echoed in her mind, drowning out years of cruel words and careful lessons in worthlessness. "Whoever told you you're nothing was lying." On the carriage ride home, Lady Corinne's fury finally erupted. "How dare you?" she hissed, her composed ballroom face replaced with raw anger. "How dare you manipulate the Duke like that, drawing his attention, making a spectacle?" "I didn't do anything," Marianne said quietly, staring at her lap. "He asked me to dance. I couldn't refuse a Duke." "You absolutely could have," Corinne snapped. A simple, "I'm not feeling well," would have sufficed. But no, you saw an opportunity and took it, you conniving little... "Mother, she really didn't do anything wrong," Bianca said, her voice uncertain. The Duke approached her. "Be silent, Bianca. You don't understand how these things work." Corinne turned her venom back on Marianne. "If you embarrass this family again, if you dare to put yourself forward like that, I will send you to the country permanently. You will spend the rest of your days in some cottage, alone and forgotten. Do you understand?" "Yes, Lady Corinne," Marianne whispered. But later, alone in her small room under the eaves, Marianne lay awake, one hand still pressed against her chest, where something new and fragile had taken root. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen worth instead of burden. She did not know if she could believe it, but God help her, she wanted to try. 2. Years earlier, when Marianne was 11, her mother had died of a winter fever. Marianne remembered her mother's gentle hands, the way she smelled of lavender, how she always called Marianne my clever girl. 6 months after the funeral, Sir Edmund Fletcher had remarried. Lady Corinne was beautiful, charming in public, and brought with her a daughter named Bianca, who was 7 years old and sweet in the thoughtless way of children who had never known hardship. The changes started small. Marianne's room was moved to the servants' floor because Bianca needed a larger space for her dolls. Marianne's dresses became Bianca's hand-me-downs because it makes more sense economically. Marianne's opinions at dinner became interruptions that earned sharp looks from Lady Corinne. Within a year, Marianne had learned that love was something other people received. She got tolerance if she was useful, and silence if she was good. Sir Edmund was not cruel. He was simply weak. Overwhelmed by debts from his first wife's medical care, grateful that Corinne managed the household efficiently, he ignored or did not see how his daughter was being slowly erased. "Your father works so hard," Corinne would say sweetly whenever Marianne looked to him for help. "We mustn't burden him with petty complaints. You're a smart girl. Surely you can manage without making a fuss." By 16, Marianne had stopped trying. She did her chores, managed the household accounts when Corinne found them tedious, and made herself as invisible as possible. It was easier that way, safer. Now, 3 days after the Ashford ball, Marianne stood in the breakfast room, pouring tea with steady hands, while Corinne read through calling cards with increasing frustration. "Nothing from the Duke," Corinne muttered. "I was certain he would call after Bianca caught his eye." "He barely looked at me, Mother," Bianca said, picking at her breakfast. She glanced at Marianne. "He spent more time looking at—" "Well, do not finish that sentence," Corinne snapped. A knock at the door made them all turn. The butler entered, carrying a silver tray with a single card. "His Grace, the Duke of Wyndale, requests permission to call on Sir Edmund Fletcher," the butler announced. Corinne's face lit up. "Show him in immediately. Bianca, sit up straight. Marianne, fetch more." "Begging your pardon, my lady," the butler interrupted carefully, "but His Grace specifically requested Miss Marianne Fletcher's presence as well." The room went silent. "Why?" Corinne's voice was dangerous. "He did not say, my lady." Corinne's smile returned, sharp as a knife. "Of course. Marianne, go change into something decent, quickly." 15 minutes later, Adrian Blackwood sat in the Fletcher drawing room, declining Corinne's offer of tea, while Sir Edmund fumbled nervously with his pipe. "Your Grace, what an honour," Sir Edmund said. "We are delighted to receive you. My daughter Bianca was just saying how much she enjoyed the Ashford ball." "It was a lovely event," Adrian said politely. His eyes tracked Marianne as she entered quietly, wearing a dress that was slightly too large and a shade of brown that did nothing for her complexion. She took a seat in the corner, clearly expecting to be ignored. "More tea, Your Grace," Corinne pushed Bianca forward slightly. "Bianca has such a talent for pouring. She's very accomplished in all the domestic arts." "I'm sure she is," Adrian said, still watching Marianne. "However, I actually came to discuss something with Miss Marianne Fletcher, if she'll permit it." Every head in the room swiveled toward Marianne. She looked like a deer who had just realized it was trapped. "With Marianne?" Sir Edmund sounded baffled. "Whatever for?" Adrian stood and moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a worn volume on estate management. "I noticed this the last time I visited. Someone has been making notes in the margins. Very practical observations about crop rotation and tenant welfare." He turned to Marianne. "Were these your notes, Miss Fletcher?" Marianne's face burned red. Yes, Your Grace. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have written in." "They're excellent," Adrian said simply. "Clear, practical, and more insightful than half the advice my stewards give me." He set the book down. "I'm hosting a small gathering next week to discuss a charitable project. We're creating a fund to help widows and children of factory workers. I find I require the insights of someone who actually understands household economies." He looked directly at Marianne. "Would you attend, Miss Fletcher? Your perspective would be invaluable." Marianne opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Surely Your Grace means Bianca," Corinne said smoothly. "She has such a generous heart and would be delighted to help with charity work." "I meant Miss Marianne Fletcher," Adrian said, his tone polite but firm. "Her notes demonstrate exactly the kind of practical thinking we need. Of course, if she's uncomfortable—" "She'll come," Sir Edmund said quickly, seeing an opportunity to please a duke. "Won't you, Marianne?" Yes, thank you, Your Grace." Marianne's voice was barely audible. Adrian smiled. "Excellent. My aunt, Lady Judith Rowan, will send details." She's managing most of the organisation, and I believe you'll find her quite refreshing company." He took his leave soon after, leaving the Fletcher household in chaos. The moment the door closed, Corinne rounded on Marianne. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I just made some notes in Father's book, I didn't think." "You manipulated this," Corinne hissed. "Somehow, you've caught his attention and you're using it to humiliate Bianca and me." "That's not true," Marianne said, her voice shaking. "I don't want his attention. I never asked for—" "Enough." Corinne's eyes narrowed. "You will attend this gathering because refusing a duke's invitation would be suspicious. But you will not speak unless spoken to. You will not put yourself forward. And if you even think about trying to trap that man into marriage, I will make your life more miserable than you can possibly imagine. Do you understand?" "Yes, Lady Corinne." That night, Marianne sat in her small room, holding the invitation that had arrived by messenger. Heavy cream paper, elegant script, the Duke's seal in dark blue wax. "You are cordially invited." She ran her fingers over the words, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Part of her knew Corinne was right. This was dangerous. The Duke's attention would only bring trouble. But another part, the part that still remembered her mother calling her clever girl, that part whispered, "What if he really does see something in you? What if you're not nothing after all?" Marianne blew out her candle and lay in the darkness, caught between hope and dread, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. 3. The gathering at Wyndale House was nothing like Marianne expected. She had imagined a grand ballroom full of London's elite, all staring at the nobody in the unfashionable dress. Instead, she was shown to a comfortable library, where perhaps a dozen people sat in a loose circle around a fireplace. Lady Corinne had dressed Marianne in what she called appropriate attire, a gown in bright peacock blue with outdated lace at the sleeves and a neckline that was slightly too low for daytime. Marianne felt like she was wearing a costume, something meant to make her look ridiculous rather than presentable. "Miss Fletcher," Adrian said, rising immediately when she entered. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit here." He gestured to a chair near his own, between him and an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm Judith Rowan," the woman said, offering her hand with no pretense. "Adrian's aunt, though I'm far more sensible than he is. You must be the young woman with the excellent notes on estate management." Yes, thank you." Marianne sat, painfully aware that several people were staring at her dress. The meeting began. Adrian explained the charitable project, a fund to help widows and children of men who had died in factory accidents. There would be direct financial assistance, but also education opportunities and job training. "The question," Adrian said, "is how to distribute funds most effectively. The amount we've raised could help 50 families survive a month, or 10 families survive a year. We need to decide which approach serves best." A wealthy merchant suggested one-time large payments. A clergyman argued for ongoing smaller support. They debated back and forth, while Marianne sat silently, her hands folded, trying to be invisible. Then the merchant said something that made Marianne's jaw tighten. "These factory families simply need to learn better household economy. A shilling goes further than they think if managed properly." The words were out before Marianne could stop them. "That's not true." Every head turned toward her. Her face burned, but she forced herself to continue. Respectfully, sir, a shilling doesn't go further just because someone wishes it to. If you have 3 children and no husband, a shilling buys bread for 3 days. That's simple mathematics, not poor management." The merchant frowned. Surely with careful budgeting. Careful budgeting doesn't create food where there is none, Marianne said, her voice stronger now. I've managed household accounts for years on very little. The number we're discussing, distributed monthly to 50 families, would give each roughly £3 per month. That's rent, food, and perhaps a bit of coal. Nothing left for medicine, or education, or emergencies. Adrian leaned forward. What would you suggest instead, Miss Fletcher? Marianne hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from her reticule. She had spent the past 3 nights running calculations, unable to stop herself. If we focus on 20 families instead of 50, we could provide £6 monthly, enough for basic stability. But more importantly, use part of the fund to create a job training program. Teach the widows skills that earn steady income. Within a year, some families won't need assistance anymore, and we can help new ones. She looked up, expecting ridicule. Instead, she found Lady Judith nodding thoughtfully. That's remarkably practical, Judith said, and far more sustainable than endless handouts. She looked at her nephew. Why didn't your expensive consultants suggest this? Because they don't actually understand poverty, Adrian said quietly, his eyes on Marianne. They understand numbers, but not the people behind them. He smiled. Miss Fletcher, would you walk us through your calculations? For the next 30 minutes, Marianne explained her thinking. She compared fashionable ball expenses to what that money could do for struggling families. 1 less tiara, 3 more roofs that don't leak, your grace, which made several people laugh. She talked about the cost of bread versus the cost of pride, and how charity worked best when it preserved dignity. By the end, the room had agreed to implement a version of her plan. The merchant looked impressed. The clergyman was taking notes, and Lady Judith was watching Marianne with unconcealed approval. After the meeting, Adrian and Marianne walked in the garden, while Judith followed at a discreet distance, serving as chaperone. You were brilliant in there, Adrian said. I talk too much, Marianne said, the weight of years making her doubt everything. Lady Corinne will be furious. I was supposed to stay quiet. Why? Because I'm not, Marianne struggled for words. I'm not the sort of person who speaks at Duke's gatherings. I'm the spare girl who holds the gloves, remember? Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. Miss Fletcher, Marianne, if I may, who told you that's all you're worth? Everyone. The word came out small and broken. My stepmother, society, my own father by his silence. They're wrong. You don't know that. You've met me twice. I know what I see, Adrian said firmly. I see someone intelligent, thoughtful, and brave enough to correct a merchant twice her age when he's spouting nonsense. I see someone who's been made to believe she's nothing, and it's the greatest lie I've ever witnessed. Marianne's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to someone like me? Adrian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I understand what it's like to be seen as a thing rather than a person. Every day, people look at me and see the Duke of Wyndale money, land, a title. They don't see Adrian. They don't care what I think or feel or want. They just want what I represent. He met her eyes. You looked at me at that ball and saw a person, not a prize. Just someone who was tired of performing. And when I look at you, I don't see nothing. I see someone real in a room full of pretenders. From behind them, Judith called out, Are you two quite finished having your meaningful moment? Some of us are getting cold. Marianne laughed, the sound surprising her. Adrian grinned. I don't know what I feel yet, Miss Fletcher, he said honestly, but I know this. You are not nothing, and I'd like to know you better if you'll permit it. I don't know if I should, Marianne admitted. Lady Corinne will make my life impossible if she thinks there's anything. Then we'll be careful, Adrian said. We'll take it slowly, but please don't disappear just because someone told you to. Marianne nodded, not trusting her voice. That evening, when she returned home, Lady Corinne was waiting. Well? Corinne's voice was ice. Did you humiliate yourself in front of the Duke's friends? I don't think so, Marianne said carefully. What did you talk about? Charitable work. How to help factory widows. Corinne laughed, a harsh sound. How appropriate. Perhaps you were practicing for your own future as a spinster dependent on charity. She stepped closer. Let me make something very clear, Marianne. The Duke is being kind to you out of pity. Men like that marry women. Like Bianca, beautiful, accomplished, proper. They don't marry odd little creatures who manage accounts and speak out of turn. Remember that before you let your imagination run away with you. That night, Marianne lay awake, Corinne's words warring with Adrian's. She wanted desperately to believe him, but years of conditioning were hard to overcome. Then she remembered something. A letter had arrived that afternoon, delivered with the household mail. She lit her candle and opened it. Dear Miss Fletcher, you have a remarkable mind. My nephew is correct to value your insights. Should you ever need assistance of any kind, my door is always open. Sincerely, Lady Judith Rowan. Marianne pressed the letter to her chest. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a fairy tale rescue. It was simply an offer of friendship from one woman to another. And for the first time, Marianne allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could choose a different story than the one she'd been told was hers. End 4. 3 weeks later, the Fletcher household finances finally collapsed. Sir Edmund called the family together in his study, his face grey with worry. I've received notice from the bank. Unless we can raise £200 by the end of the month, they'll begin selling off property. Lady Corinne went white, then red. How is this possible? I've managed every penny carefully. Not carefully enough, it seems, Sir Edmund said wearily. After he dismissed them, Corinne caught Marianne in the hallway. Her eyes had a calculating gleam that made Marianne's stomach turn. Your mother had a small inheritance, Corinne said. It's been held in trust for you, meant for your marriage settlement. About £150. Marianne's blood went cold. That money was the only thing she had that was truly hers. Her mother's final gift. If you sign it over to your father, we can save the estate, Corinne continued. It's the least you can do, given how much we've sacrificed for you over the years. Marianne's voice failed. Unless you're too selfish, Corinne said softly. Unless all your talk about helping people is just performance. If you refuse, this family loses everything. And everyone will know it's because you valued your own comfort over your family's survival. Marianne felt the trap closing. Agree and lose the only security she had. Refuse and be branded selfish, proving everything Corinne had ever said about her. I need time to think, she whispered. You have until tomorrow, Corinne said. That night, Marianne barely slept. By morning, she had made a decision. She would sign over the money. What choice did she have? But as she sat at breakfast, barely able to eat, a card arrived. Lady Judith Rowan was calling. Corinne plastered on a smile, but her eyes were sharp with suspicion. Why would a duke's aunt visit unannounced? Judith swept into the drawing room with the confidence of someone who had never been told to make herself small. She was in her 50s, handsome rather than pretty, wearing practical travelling clothes. Lady Corinne, how delightful, Judith said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was hoping to speak with Miss Fletcher about our charitable project. We have some correspondence to review." "Of course," Corinne said tightly. "Marianne, see to Lady Judith's needs. I'll be in the morning room if you require me." Once they were alone in the library, Judith dropped all pretense. "I've heard about your father's financial troubles," she said bluntly. "Village gossip travels fast, and I suspect your stepmother is pressuring you to sacrifice your inheritance." Marianne's shock must have shown on her face. "I've seen this pattern before," Judith continued. "A young woman with no protection, forced to give up everything while others take and take and take." She leaned forward. "I came to offer you an alternative." "What alternative?" Marianne's voice shook. "Come live with me. I need a companion to help manage my charitable work and correspondence. I'll pay you a small salary enough to maintain independence. You'll have your own room, your own space, and the freedom to make your own choices." "But my family—" "Your family has taken everything from you already," Judith said, not unkindly. "Your labour, your confidence, your money. At what point do you get to choose yourself?" Marianne stared at her. "What about the Duke? Does he know you're offering this?" "Adrian knows I'm visiting, but this offer is mine alone. It has nothing to do with whether he courts you or not." Judith's eyes were steady. "I'm not rescuing you for my nephew's sake. I'm offering you a choice because every woman deserves one, and you've been denied yours for too long." After Judith left, Marianne sat alone in the library, her mind spinning. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her a path that didn't require sacrificing herself. That evening, Lady Corinne cornered her again. "Well, have you decided about the inheritance?" Marianne took a breath. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. "No." Corinne's face went dangerously still. "Excuse me. I won't sign over my mother's money." "You ungrateful." "I've managed father's accounts for 3 years," Marianne said, her courage growing with each word. "I've caught errors in your spending, found savings wherever possible, and kept this household running while you and Bianca spent money on new dresses every month. I've done more than earn my keep. I've subsidized yours. How dare you?" "Father." Marianne turned to where Sir Edmund stood in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. "Did you know Lady Corinne spends £40 a month on her personal expenses? Or that she's been intercepting my letters from Lady Judith? Or that she calls me nothing when you're not listening?" Sir Edmund's face went pale. "Marianne, that's a serious accusation." "It's the truth," Marianne said, tears finally spilling over. "I've been afraid to tell you because I thought you didn't care, but I need you to know what happens in your house when you're not looking." The conversation that followed was ugly and painful. Corinne denied everything, then justified everything, then finally broke down in angry tears, accusing Marianne of destroying the family. Bianca watched with wide, confused eyes, torn between her mother and the growing realization that things she'd thought were normal were actually cruel. In the end, Sir Edmund didn't transform into a hero. He didn't throw Corinne out or apologize properly. But he did say, quietly, "If Lady Judith has offered you a position, perhaps you should consider it." It wasn't much, but it was permission. 2 days later, Marianne packed her single trunk. She kept her mother's music box, a few books, and her simplest dresses. Everything else stayed behind. Bianca found her as she was closing the trunk. "You're really leaving?" "Yes." "I'm sorry," Bianca said, suddenly. "I never realized. I thought Mother was just strict with you. I didn't know she was." She trailed off, unable to find words. "I know," Marianne said, and surprisingly, she meant it. Bianca had been raised to believe their family dynamics were normal. She was spoiled but not cruel, thoughtless but not malicious. "Will you write to me?" Bianca asked. If you want me to, I do. Bianca hugged her quickly, awkwardly. You're braver than I am. As Marianne climbed into Lady Judith's carriage, she looked back at the Fletcher house one last time. She felt grief for what she'd lost, fear for what came next, but also something she'd never felt before. Freedom, the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path. 5. Living with Lady Judith was like stepping into a different world. Marianne had her own comfortable bedroom, not a servant's room, under the eaves. She was paid a small but real salary for her work managing correspondence and helping organise charitable events. She ate at the table as an equal, not as an afterthought. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment and share. Your support helps us continue creating more stories of love, redemption and second chances that matter. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our romantic stories. Click and discover more beautiful tales of courage and connection. With all our gratitude, Duke's Story.